I'm guilty. Don't waste your time." These 7 words would change everything in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom that Tuesday morning. What happened next shocked not just the defendant, not just the court staff, but everyone who witnessed what true justice looks like when it meets raw honesty. Sarah Mitchell walked through those heavy oak doors expecting punishment. What she got instead was something far more powerful, a reminder that character still matters in this world. But let me take you back to where this story really begins. 3 days earlier. The alarm clock screamed at 5:47 a.m. in Sarah's small Providence apartment. Another sleepless night behind her, another impossible day ahead. Her 8-year-old daughter Emma was running a fever of 102, and Sarah's boss had already made it crystal clear. One more absence, and she'd be looking for a new job. Sarah stared at Emma's flushed face on the pillow. The medication wasn't working. The fever had been climbing since midnight, and now Emma was shivering despite being covered in 3 blankets. "Mommy, my head hurts so bad," Emma whispered, her small voice cracking. Sarah's heart broke a little more. She checked the time again. The pediatric clinic opened at 7 a.m., but if she didn't make it to work by 8:30, she knew exactly what would happen. Her manager, Mrs. Davidson, had been looking for a reason to let her go ever since the company started restructuring. But looking at her daughter's pale face, there really was no choice at all. 2 hours later, Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel as she raced down Elmwood Avenue. Emma was finally sleeping in the back seat, antibiotics and fever reducer finally, starting to work after what felt like an eternity in the clinic waiting room. Her phone had been buzzing constantly. 17 missed calls from work. She knew what each one meant. The traffic light ahead turned yellow. Sarah pressed harder on the gas pedal. She was already 2 hours late. Maybe, just maybe, if she could get to the office and explain everything. Face to face, Mrs. Davidson would understand. Maybe she could keep her job. The light turned red, just as Sarah's car crossed the intersection. She saw the flash in her rearview mirror and felt her stomach drop to the floor. The traffic camera had captured everything. 2 weeks later, the envelope arrived on a Friday morning. Citation for traffic violation. Sarah opened it with trembling hands, already knowing what she'd find inside. $150. She stared at the number until it blurred through her tears. $150 might as well have been $1,000. After losing her job that same day, Mrs. Davidson had been even less understanding than Sarah had feared. Every penny counted toward rent, utilities, and Emma's medical bills. Sarah looked at the options on the citation. She could pay the fine, or she could contest it in court. Fighting it might reduce the penalty, but it could also make things worse. And honestly, what was there to fight? She had run that red light. She knew it, the camera knew it, and now Judge Frank Caprio would know it too. Present day, Providence Municipal Court. Sarah sat in the hard plastic chair in the courthouse waiting room, watching other defendants pace nervously or frantically, flip through legal documents. Some had lawyers whispering strategies in their ears. Others practiced their excuses out loud. Just tell them you didn't see the sign. Say the sun was in your eyes. Claim the speedometer was broken. Sarah listened to the advice floating around the room and felt something settle in her chest. A strange kind of peace she hadn't expected. She wasn't going to lie. When her name was called, Sarah Mitchell walked into that courtroom with her shoulders straight and her conscience clear. She had made a choice 3 weeks ago to put her daughter's health above everything else, including traffic laws. She didn't regret it for a second. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from his paperwork as Sarah approached the bench. At 78 years old, he had seen every excuse, every sob story, every creative interpretation of traffic law that human imagination could produce. But he hadn't seen this. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Caprio began, reading from the citation, "you're charged with failing to stop at a red light on Elmwood Avenue." The fine is $150. How do you plead? Sarah took a deep breath. Your Honor, I'm guilty. I ran that red light, and I'm not going to waste your time pretending. Otherwise, the courtroom went completely silent. Judge Caprio slowly removed his reading glasses and looked directly at Sarah. In 35 years on the bench, he had heard thousands of cases. People fought $50 parking tickets with more passion than some lawyers defended felony charges. And here was a woman facing a significant fine, simply admitting it. Ms. Mitchell, he said carefully, are you sure you don't want to tell me your side of the story? Your Honor, my side of the story doesn't change the facts. That light was red, and I drove through it anyway. I made that choice consciously, and I accept the consequences. The court clerk stopped typing. The bailiff paused mid-step. Even the usual whispers from the gallery fell away completely. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair. Miss Mitchell, I have to ask. In all my years doing this, I've never had someone walk in here and just tell the truth like that. Why aren't you trying to get out of this? Sarah's voice remained steady, but those who were listening closely could hear something deeper underneath. Not defeat, but something more like dignity. Your Honor, I ran that light because my daughter was sick, and I was trying to get to work before I lost my job. I was scared, and I was desperate, and I made a choice. It was the wrong choice legally, but it was the right choice as a mother. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I could stand here and make excuses. I could tell you about the medical bills, or the fact that I did lose my job anyway, or how hard it's been raising Emma alone. But none of that changes what I did. I broke the law, and that's on me. Judge Caprio had been watching Sarah's face throughout her explanation. There was something in her expression he rarely saw in his courtroom. Complete honesty, without self-pity. Ms. Mitchell, tell me about your daughter. Emma's 8. She had pneumonia last month, which is why we were rushing to the clinic that morning. She's healthy now, thank God, but Sarah's voice caught slightly. She's everything to me, Your Honor. Everything I do, every choice I make, is about making sure she has a chance at a better life than I've been able to give her. So far, and your job situation? I was let go that same day. They said it was the final straw, missing work again. I understand their position, but I'd make the same choice again if I had to. Emma comes first, always. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. He thought about his own children, his own grandchildren. He thought about the thousands of cases he'd heard where people had elaborate explanations for simple mistakes. And then he thought about what Sarah Mitchell represented. Ms. Mitchell, do you have any prior traffic violations? No, Your Honor. This is my first citation. And in all your years of driving, this is the first time you've run a red light? Yes, sir. I've been driving for 15 years, and I've never had so much as a parking ticket. Judge Caprio was quiet for a long moment. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Ms. Mitchell, I want to tell you something. I've been a judge for 35 years. I've heard every excuse, every explanation, every reason why people shouldn't be held responsible for their actions. And in all that time, I can count on one hand the number of people who walked into my courtroom and simply told the truth, without trying to wiggle out of it. He leaned forward slightly. You made a mistake. You admit that. But you made that mistake because you were being a good mother. And then you came in here and took responsibility for it because you're a good person. Sarah felt tears building behind her eyes, but blinked them back. Your Honor, I appreciate your understanding, but I'm prepared to pay the fine. I knew the risk when I ran that light. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Caprio said with a slight smile, what if I told you that honesty still counts for something in this world? He paused, looking down at the citation in front of him. Here's what I'm going to do. This fine is dismissed. The words seemed to echo in the suddenly silent courtroom. Furthermore, Judge Caprio continued, I want you to take this citation home and show it to your daughter when she's old enough to understand it. Show her what it means to take responsibility for your actions, even when it's hard. Show her what it means to put family first, and show her what it means to tell the truth, even when lying would be easier. Sarah's composure finally broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she tried to find words that wouldn't come. Your Honor, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, Ms. Mitchell. Just keep being the kind of mother who raises her child to have the same integrity you showed here today. Judge Caprio looked out at the packed courtroom, at all the faces watching this exchange with amazement. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what justice looks like. Not punishment for punishment's sake, but recognition that good people sometimes face impossible choices. Ms. Mitchell could have come in here with a dozen excuses, but instead, she showed us something we don't see enough of anymore. Personal responsibility combined with honest human dignity. He turned back to Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, I hope your job situation improves soon. And I hope Emma grows up to be as honest and brave as her mother. As Sarah walked out of that courtroom, something had fundamentally changed. Not just the outcome of her case, but something deeper. She had walked in expecting judgment and walked out having received grace. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months later, Sarah was stocking shelves at her new job. Better pay, better hours, and a manager who actually understood that sometimes life happens. When her phone buzzed with a notification, someone had posted a video of her courthouse appearance online. The comments section was filled with people sharing their own stories about making hard choices as parents, about the value of honesty, about wanting to see more judges like Frank Caprio. But the comment that made Sarah screenshot the video was from a username she recognized. Emma Mitchell, 2014, her daughter had written, "This is my mom. She taught me that being honest isn't always easy, but it's always right. I'm proud of her every single day." Emma was only 8 years old, but somehow she had understood everything that happened in that courtroom. She understood that her mother had chosen truth over convenience, responsibility over excuses, integrity over self-preservation. Back in Judge Caprio's chambers, Judge Caprio kept a folder on his desk labeled, "Why We Do This." Inside were letters from people whose lives had been touched by mercy instead of rigid punishment, by understanding instead of bureaucratic indifference. The letter from Sarah Mitchell was the newest addition. Your Honor, I want you to know that what happened in your courtroom 3 months ago didn't just dismiss a traffic fine, it restored my faith in justice itself. More importantly, it gave my daughter a lesson about integrity that no classroom could ever provide. She talks about that day constantly, about how telling the truth is always the right choice, even when it's scary. You didn't just see a woman who ran a red light. You saw a mother doing her best in an impossible situation, and you responded with wisdom instead of just following rules. That distinction is everything. Emma is doing well in school, and I'm back on my feet financially. But more than that, we both learned something about what it means to live with integrity. Thank you for reminding us that character still matters, that honesty still has value, and that justice is supposed to be about more than just punishment. With deepest gratitude, Sarah and Emma Mitchell. Judge Caprio smiled as he placed the letter back in the folder. This was exactly why he had spent 4 decades on the bench, not to blindly enforce rules, but to find the human story behind every case and respond with both justice and compassion. The ripple effect. Word of Sarah's case spread throughout the Providence community like wildfire. People started talking about what real accountability looks like, about the difference between making excuses and taking responsibility while still acknowledging difficult circumstances. At coffee shops and dinner tables across the city, parents shared the story with their children. Teachers used it in their classrooms when discussing character and integrity. Business leaders referenced it in meetings about corporate responsibility. Local business owners began reaching out to Sarah with job opportunities. Someone had shared her story at a networking event, describing her as exactly the kind of person we want to hire. Someone with integrity who takes responsibility for her actions. Margaret Chen, owner of a local accounting firm, called Sarah directly. "I watched that video of your court appearance," she said. "We need people like you on our team, people who understand that honesty isn't just a policy, it's a way of life." The Providence Journal ran a full feature story titled, "When Truth Meets Justice, A Mother's Lesson in Integrity." The article sparked hundreds of letters to the editor, with readers sharing their own stories about times when honesty had been rewarded, or when they wished they'd had the courage to tell the truth. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a psychology professor at Brown University, used Sarah's case in his ethics course. "What we see here," he told his students, "is the power of authentic accountability. Most people confuse explanation with excuse-making. Sarah Mitchell showed the difference." Parents across Rhode Island began using Sarah's courtroom appearance as a teaching moment with their own children about honesty and personal responsibility. Lisa Thompson, a single mother from nearby Warwick, wrote on social media, "I showed this video to my teenage son after he lied about his grades. We had the most honest conversation we've had in years about taking responsibility for our choices. Thank you, Sarah Mitchell, for showing us what courage looks like." The story reached beyond Rhode Island when a national news network picked it up as part of a segment called Faith in Humanity Restored. Suddenly, Sarah was receiving messages from people across the country who had been inspired by her example. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Judge Patricia Williams from the California Superior Court sent a handwritten letter to Judge Caprio. "Frank, I've been on the bench for 20 years, and I've become increasingly discouraged by the erosion of personal responsibility I see every day. Then I watched the video of Ms. Mitchell in your courtroom. I wanted you to know that her example, and your response to it, has renewed my faith in what we're trying to accomplish here. I'm sharing this with every judge in our district." And Judge Caprio, he continued doing what he had always done, looking past the surface of each case to find the human being underneath, and responding with the kind of wisdom that comes from decades of understanding that justice isn't just about rules, but about people. But something had shifted after Sarah's case. He found himself thinking more deeply about the long-term impact of each decision, about the lessons being absorbed not just by the defendants in front of him, but by the thousands of people who might see these interactions online. During his next case, a young man caught speeding on his way to a job interview. Judge Caprio asked himself, what would Sarah Mitchell do? The answer was clear. The young man told the truth about his situation, took responsibility for breaking the law, and received a reduced fine along with some career advice that proved invaluable. Judge Caprio began each day wondering, how can I help people understand that integrity and accountability aren't punishments, they're freedoms? The lesson that changed everything. In a world where deflection has become an art form, where everyone seems to have an excuse for everything, Sarah Mitchell walked into a courtroom and simply told the truth. She didn't minimize her actions, didn't blame circumstances, didn't try to manipulate the system. She took responsibility, and in return, she received something far more valuable than a dismissed fine. She received proof that integrity still matters, that honesty still has power, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is simply tell the truth and accept the consequences. Judge Caprio saw past the traffic violation to the human being standing before him. He recognized that good people sometimes face impossible choices, and that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about recognizing character and responding with grace. But perhaps the most important lesson wasn't for Sarah or for Judge Caprio, it was for Emma. That 8-year-old girl learned that day that integrity isn't just a nice idea. It's a way of living that has real consequences. She learned that telling the truth, even when it's hard, is always the right choice. She learned that taking responsibility for your actions isn't weakness, it's strength. And she learned that sometimes, when you choose honesty over convenience, the world responds with exactly the kind of grace you never knew you needed. Today, Sarah works as a supervisor at a local nonprofit organization. Emma, now 11, volunteers at the courthouse during school breaks, inspired by Judge Caprio's example of compassionate justice. But the real legacy of that Tuesday morning isn't found in any official court record. It's found in the choice that gets made every time someone faces a difficult situation and remembers that telling the truth, the whole truth, without excuses or blame, is still the most powerful thing you can do. Justice isn't just about following rules. It's about seeing people clearly, understanding their circumstances, and responding with both accountability and compassion. That's what Judge Frank Caprio understood that morning. And that's what Sarah Mitchell proved when she walked into that courtroom and said 7 simple words that changed everything. I'm guilty. Don't waste your time. The legacy continues. Judge Frank Caprio, now in his 80s, sat in his study at home, reading through the latest batch of letters that continued to arrive weekly from around the world. People sharing their own stories of choosing truth over convenience, accountability over excuse-making, integrity over self-protection. One letter, from a teenager in Germany, particularly caught his attention. Dear Judge Caprio, I am 16 years old and I made a terrible mistake. I cheated on my university entrance exam and I got caught. My parents wanted to hire lawyers to fight it, to claim there was some technicality that could get me off. But then my older sister showed me the video of Sarah Mitchell in your courtroom. I realized that trying to escape consequences for my cheating would just be another form of cheating. So I confessed fully, accepted my punishment, and I'm retaking the exam next year. My parents were angry at first, but now they tell me they're proud of who I'm becoming. Sarah Mitchell taught me that integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about how you handle it when you're not perfect. Judge Caprio smiled and reached for his pen to add the letter to his collection. But then he paused and instead reached for his phone. The call. Sarah, it's Judge Caprio. I hope I'm not calling too late. Judge, never too late for you. How are you? I'm well, thank you. Sarah, I just finished reading the most remarkable letter from a young woman in Germany who was inspired by your story to handle her own mistake with integrity. And it got me thinking. What about? It's been 10 years since that day in my courtroom. 10 years of watching your story ripple out across the world, inspiring people to make different choices about honesty and accountability. I've been wondering, what do you think it all means? Sarah was quiet for a moment. You know, Judge, people ask me that a lot. They want to know if I think I changed the world or started some kind of movement. But honestly, I think the real power of what happened that day isn't that I did something extraordinary. It's that I did something very ordinary. I told the truth, and people responded to it because deep down, everyone knows that's what we're supposed to do. Go on. I think people were hungry for an example of what authentic accountability looks like. Not because it's rare to see someone take responsibility for their mistakes, but because it's rare to see someone do it without also making excuses, without also playing the victim, without also trying to manipulate the outcome. Judge Caprio nodded, even though Sarah couldn't see him. You showed them what it looks like to accept consequences with dignity. Exactly. And I think that resonated, because so many people have been in situations where they made mistakes and didn't know how to handle them with integrity. They saw that it was possible to own your choices completely and still walk away with your head held high. Sarah, I tell you something. In my 40 years on the bench, I've seen thousands of people try to avoid responsibility for their actions. What struck me about you that day wasn't just that you were honest. It was that you were peaceful. Even though you were scared, even though you didn't know what would happen, you seemed relieved. I was relieved, Sarah replied. I was exhausted from carrying the weight of fear and shame. When I decided to just tell the truth and accept whatever happened, it felt like putting down a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for weeks. The final lesson. As their conversation continued, both Sarah and Judge Caprio reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple traffic violation and grown into a global conversation about integrity and accountability. You know, what I think the most important part of this whole story is, Sarah asked. What's that? It's not that telling the truth solved all my problems. I still had to rebuild my life after losing my job. Emma and I still struggled financially for months. The fine being dismissed was wonderful, but it didn't magically fix everything. But choosing integrity over self-protection gave me something more valuable than any practical benefit. It gave me back my self-respect. And once you have that, you can handle whatever challenges come next. Judge Caprio felt tears welling up in his eyes. Sarah, in all my years of trying to balance justice with compassion, I've learned that the most important thing we can do is help people maintain their dignity, even in their worst moments. What you did that day, taking responsibility without making excuses, that was you maintaining your own dignity. And that's what gave me permission to respond with mercy. I never thought of it that way, but I think you're right. When someone approaches accountability with dignity, it creates space for mercy. When someone approaches it with manipulation or blame shifting, it creates space for punishment. As their conversation drew to a close, Judge Caprio asked one final question. Sarah, if you could go back to that morning 10 years ago, knowing everything you know now about how your choice would impact not just your own life, but thousands of other lives around the world, would you do anything differently? Sarah didn't hesitate. I would do exactly the same thing. Not because of the global impact, I had no way of knowing that would happen, but because it was the right thing to do. And I've learned that when you consistently choose to do the right thing, even when it's scary, even when you don't know how it will turn out, somehow everything works out the way it's supposed to. That might be the most important lesson of all, Judge Caprio replied. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for showing all of us what integrity looks like in action. The story that never ends, as we reach the end of this remarkable journey, from a traffic violation to a global movement inspiring millions to choose honesty over convenience. It's important to remember that Sarah Mitchell's story isn't really about what happened in a Providence courtroom 10 years ago. It's about what happens in your life today and tomorrow and every day after that. Every time you face a choice between telling the truth and protecting yourself, you're standing where Sarah stood that Tuesday morning. Every time you decide whether to take full responsibility for a mistake or to hedge your bets with excuses and blame shifting, you're making the same choice she made. And every time you choose integrity over convenience, authenticity over manipulation, accountability over victimhood, you're not just changing your own life, you're creating ripples that will reach people and places you'll never know about. That's the power of what Sarah Mitchell showed us. Not that honesty guarantees good outcomes, but that honesty guarantees something more valuable than any outcome. It guarantees that you get to live with dignity, that you get to sleep peacefully at night, that you get to look at yourself in the mirror with respect. Judge Frank Caprio understood this when he responded to Sarah's honesty with mercy rather than punishment. He recognized that someone who approaches accountability with dignity deserves to be treated with dignity in return. But perhaps most importantly, Emma Mitchell, that 8-year-old girl who watched her mother choose truth over comfort, learned a lesson that will guide her for the rest of her life. That integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about how you handle it when you're not perfect. So what about you? As you go about your life after watching this story, you'll face moments when telling the truth feels scary, when taking responsibility feels risky, when doing the right thing feels like it might cost you something important. In those moments, remember Sarah Mitchell walking into that courtroom with her shoulders straight and her conscience clear, saying 7 words that changed everything. I'm guilty. Don't waste your time. Remember that integrity isn't about the response you get. It's about the person you become when you choose truth over comfort, accountability over excuse-making, dignity over manipulation. And remember that every time you make that choice, you're not just changing your own story. You're giving permission to everyone around you to live with the same kind of courage and authenticity. That's how one woman's decision to tell the truth in a traffic court became a global movement that's still growing, still inspiring, still reminding us that character matters, that integrity is powerful, and that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply tell the truth. What would you have done in Sarah's situation? What would you have done if you were Judge Caprio? More importantly, what will you do the next time you face a choice between honesty and self-protection? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because these conversations remind us that we all have the power to choose integrity, and those choices create ripples that can reach further than we ever imagined. Hit that subscribe button if you believe that honesty still matters, that taking responsibility is a form of strength, and that ordinary people making extraordinary choices about integrity can change the world. And remember, every time you choose truth over comfort, every time you take responsibility instead of making excuses, every time you approach your mistakes with dignity rather than denial, you're continuing Sarah Mitchell's story. You're proving that integrity isn't just an old-fashioned concept. It's the foundation upon which everything meaningful is built. Because in a world that often rewards deception and punishes honesty, choosing to tell the truth isn't just a personal decision. It's an act of courage that inspires others to be braver too. Just ask Sarah Mitchell. Just ask Judge Frank Caprio. Just ask Emma, now Dr. Emma Mitchell Rodriguez, who builds her career on the lesson she learned watching her mother choose truth over comfort in a Providence courtroom. And just ask the millions of people around the world whose lives have been touched by one woman's decision to walk into court and say, "I'm guilty. Don't waste your time." Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is the simplest thing, the truth.